Today, we're diving into something huge in India's legal system, a complete rewrite of its criminal laws. We're talking about a colonial-era rulebook getting tossed out for a brand new code. So what does this actually mean for over 1 billion people? Let's get into it.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. The old Indian Penal Code, a holdover from the British Raj, is gone. And in its place, we have the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, or BNS, from 2023. We're not talking about a few small tweaks here. This is a foundational shift, a total reset for the world's largest democracy. All right, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is this new code? Who does it apply to? And what really makes it so different from the laws that were in place for more than a century? So, the official language says the goal is to consolidate and amend India's criminal laws. But honestly, the most important word on this slide is repeal. This isn't just a renovation. It's a complete teardown and rebuild of a legal structure that's been standing for over 150 years. And check this out. Its reach is, well, it's global. Of course, it applies to any Indian citizen, no matter where they are in the world. But look at that last point. It also covers anyone, anywhere on the planet, who commits a cybercrime targeting a computer in India. If that doesn't scream this law was built for the digital age, I don't know what does. Okay, so before we jump into the really juicy stuff like murder or theft, we gotta get the basics down. The fundamental building blocks of the law. How does this new code even define the language of crime? First up, the word act. Sounds simple, right? But the law is really specific. It clarifies that an act can be a single event, sure, but it can also be a whole series of them. And that's super important because it lets the courts look at an entire pattern of behavior, not just one isolated moment. All right, so what's an offense? This definition makes a really crucial point. This isn't about what's morally right or wrong. It's about what's legal. If an action is listed as punishable in this code or any other law, then boom, it's an offense. Simple as that. Now this one's really interesting. The definition of good faith. It's not just about having good intentions. The law says that for something to be done in good faith, you have to have used due care and attention. So it sets a much higher bar. Just meaning well, yeah, that's not going to cut it as a legal defense. And then there's injury. Wow, they define this so broadly, it's not just about physical harm. The law specifically recognizes that harm to a person's mind, their reputation, or their property is a legitimate legal injury. This wide scope is the foundation for all kinds of offenses, from defamation to causing emotional distress. Okay, so we know what a crime is, but what about when something harmful happens and it's not a crime? Well, the BNS has a whole chapter for that, called general exceptions. These are basically circumstances that legally excuse an act and remove any criminal blame. And a huge one has to do with kids. If a child is under 7, they are legally considered incapable of committing a crime, period. Between the ages of 7 and 12, it's a bit more complicated. It's not an offense if the court determines the child wasn't mature enough to really understand what they were doing and what would happen because of it. And it's not just about age. The code lays out a bunch of other key exceptions that are all built on ideas of fairness and what someone intended to do. Things like an act by a judge doing their job, a genuine accident, or acting in self-defense. To make these ideas really clear, the law gives us some classic, kind of old-school examples. All right, here's a classic, the case of the flying hatchet head. If person A was being careful, the head flying off and killing someone is a horrible tragedy, but it's not a crime. The entire thing really hangs on that one phrase, proper caution. If they were being reckless, well, that's a whole different story. And what about this one? This is all about being bound by law. If you're a soldier and you genuinely believe you're following a legal order from your superior officer, then you haven't committed an offense. This is designed to protect people who are required to follow orders as part of their duty. And this last example is so important. It shows what happens when you combine consent with good faith. A surgeon knows an operation is risky, but they do it with the patient's full consent and with the genuine intention of helping them. Even if the worst happens, the law protects the surgeon because their actions weren't malicious. Okay, now that we've got the building blocks down, let's get into the heavy hitters. We're going to look at how the BNS defines some of the most serious threats to society. And this is where we see some of the biggest changes. Because for the first time ever, things like terrorism and organized crime are being defined in the main penal code. So get this.
terrorism used to be handled by separate special laws. Now, it's defined right here in India's main criminal code. That's a huge deal. And the definition is incredibly broad. It covers any act meant to threaten the nation's security or integrity, but also any act that's just meant to strike terror in people. And the same goes for organized crime. For the very first time, it's getting its own definition in the primary law book. The law zeroes in on the continuing unlawful activity of criminal groups that use violence and threats to make money. It's a major step in putting the fight against these syndicates right into the code. And just look at the list of what counts. We're talking about the whole shebang, from old-school rackets like extortion and contract killing to very modern crimes like large-scale cybercrime and human trafficking. Another really big focus in this new code is on protecting women and children. It aims to do this by making existing laws sharper and clearer, and also by introducing new offenses, many of which are designed to close loopholes that existed in the old legal system. And this might be one of the most important clarifications in the entire code, the definition of consent. The law now defines it as an unequivocal voluntary agreement. And then it goes even further, stating flat out that just because a woman doesn't physically resist, that can never, by itself, be seen as consent. That is a landmark clarification. The BNS also brings in some brand new offenses, things that just weren't on the books in this way before. They reflect a lot of modern-day concerns, covering everything from personal deception, like having sex based on a false promise of marriage, to community-level crimes, like mob lynching. There's even a new category for smaller-scale, or petty, organized crime. So, at the end of the day, what are we looking at here? The Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is so much more than just a new law. It's really a statement about the future. It's an attempt to decolonize and modernize a justice system for 1.4 billion people. Its real impact on police, on courts, and on daily life is something we're all going to see unfold over the coming years. How will it truly shape India's future? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And only time will tell.